Okay, here we are. Sunday, August 28th, 2022. I'm Larissa. I was able to get up and get myself to the grocery store and get everything put away. And now I'm having me some iced tea here. Now, this is my black rhubarb sun tea, but it's only half sun tea because I really don't like the bitterness off of black tea, right? You have to be real careful with it sometimes, depending on what it is when it's just plain black tea, not something like an Earl Grey or something. So this is what I did this time. I made the rhubarb portion of the tea sun tea. So I let the rhubarb steep in the water in the sun for like a day and a half, 2 days. Then I strained out the rhubarb and I put the rhubarb water, this is basically rhubarb water then, into jars. And then I put one tea bag, one black PG Tips tea bag into each jar. I took it out and I put it in the refrigerator. So it was a total cold brew. Total cold brew. And it is very refreshing. It's refreshing, but I will say, I won't do it again because I actually prefer the black tea processed in the sun over to the dark cold process. I mean, it's good, but I do prefer it the other way. It was just an experiment. It's faster too, right? Tonight, right now Omar is taking chickens, moving them. He's moving chickens. He's moving chickens, yo. He's moving chickens. He's moving chickens, yo. Gucci Mane, right? So Omar's out there moving chickens. He's going to take Baby Cakes and move her little apartment next to the chicken row home. So she's going to have her little caboose up there. And then he's going to put Fluffernutter, he's going to move Fluffernutter, make like a little lean-to for him on the other side. So all the chickens are in one place, but Fluffernutter still won't be able to get to anybody to bite their heads off. And hopefully, Baby Cakes there'll be a time of acclimation with the other chickens because we had originally tried to move her up there with the other chickens, right? But she was just so mean. She was so aggressive. She was so aggressive with the other hens. We had to, like, both in laying boxes. It didn't matter what laying box the Barred Rocks or Camilla wanted to lay in. Baby Cakes would then go try to set up shop in there and take up all the room, right? And then she would poopy in the box because she was like that. She's like that. She's like that. She's a shitty bird to other birds. Loves people but doesn't like other birds. So. And then she would go after them. She was food aggressive too, so we kept her separated. But now if we move her apartment up there next to them and they see each other and they have yard time together and everything, then maybe slowly we'll be able to acclimate her into the other enclosure. And then the smaller enclosure that she's in, we can use for bringing in new birds, adding new birds if and when we need to. But Fluffernutter, he is such a brute. He's so mean. He's so mean. He will not even be able to have yard time at the same time as the other chickens. He will have to have yard time by himself. And I was considering allowing him to have yard time, like run of the garden, because he's so mean. He might be able to keep away rodents. He might chase after rodents, keep rodents away from stuff. He might deter rodents. But the eagle could get him. I think he's far too big for the hawk. He's like 3-4 times the size of the hawk. Maybe not that much. Maybe 2 or 3 times the size of the hawk, but the eagle could definitely get him. I don't know. We'll see. He's a big chicken. He's a really big chicken. He stands like over a foot tall, well over a foot tall. Like when he's top of his head, down to his tootsies, his fluffy foots. Fluffernutter. So that's what Omar's out there doing. And later on we're going to barbecue. And he wanted tuna steaks, so I got tuna steaks. And it's more than what we can eat tonight. But he likes his tuna steak more rare, and I'd like mine a little more well done. So we can't eat the same piece. And the leftovers, then I can use tomorrow either to make a tuna salad or maybe do like a tuna quiche, right? Do a grilled tuna quiche if we have eggs enough. But I'll most likely do tuna salad, probably. And then I have some, I got some Brussels sprouts. So we're gonna have Brussels sprouts and tuna steaks and grilled figs. That's what we're gonna have for dinner tonight. I don't know. Maybe I have some bread here. We'll do a little bit of toast, and we can smear those barbecue figs on the toast. That's what we're gonna do. That's what we're gonna do for dinner. Some of the figs I'm gonna dehydrate, so I'll have to do that. Anyway, back to reading. Haroun and the Sea of Stories, a novel by Mr. Salman Rushdie. Chapter 5, about guppies and chupwallas. Haroun had not forgotten what his father had said about Katam Shud. Too many fancy notions are turning out to be true, he thought. At once, but the hoopoe answered without moving its beak. A strange sort of story, Moon Arkahani, would be if storybook things weren't everywhere to be found, and Haroun had to admit that was a reasonable remark. They were speeding south to Gup City. The hoopoe had chosen to remain on the water, zooming along like a speedboat, spraying stormy streams in every direction. Doesn't it muddle up the stories? Haroun inquired. All this turbulence, it must mix things up dreadfully. No problem, cried Butt the hoopoe. Any story worth its salt can handle a little shaking up, va-voom. Abandoning what was clearly not a profitable line of conversation, Haroun returned to more important matters. Tell me more about this Katam Shud, he requested, and was utterly amazed when If replied in almost the very same words that Rashid Khalifa had used. He is the archenemy of all stories, even of language itself. He is the prince of silence and the foe of speech. At least, and here the water genie abandoned the somewhat too sonorous tone of the preceding sentences. That's what they say. When it comes to the land of Chup, its people, the Chupwallas, it's all mostly gossip and flim-flam because it's generations since any of us went across the twilight strip into the perpetual night. You'll have to forgive me, Haroun broke in, but I'm going to need a little help with geography. Humph, sniffed Butt the hoopoe. Poorly educated, I see. That's totally illogical, Haroun retorted. You're the one who's been boasting about how speed has hidden this moon from people on Earth, so it's unreasonable to expect us to know about its topographical features, principal exports, and the like. But Butt's eye was twinkling. Really, there were major difficulties involved in talking to machines, Haroun thought. With their deadpan expressions, it was impossible to know when they were pulling their leg. Thanks to the genius of the eggheads at P2C2E House, Butt began, taking pity on Haroun, the rotation of Kahani has been brought under control. As a result, the land of Gup is bathed in endless sunshine, while over in Chup, it's always the middle of the night. In between the two lies the twilight strip, in which, at the Grand Controller's command, Guppies long ago constructed an unremarkable, and also invisible, wall of force. Its good name is Chattergee's Wall, named for our king, who of course had absolutely nothing to do with building it. Hold on a minute, Haroun frowned. If Kahani goes around the Earth, even if it goes very fast indeed, there must be moments when the Earth is between it and the sun, so it can't be true that one half is always the daylight. You're telling stories again. Naturally I'm telling stories, Butt the hoopoe replied, and if you have any arguments, please take them up with the walrus. Now excuse, please, while I pay attention ahead. Volume of traffic has dramatically increased. Haroun had plenty more questions to ask. Why did the Chupwallas live in permanent night? Must it not be very cold indeed if the sun never shone at all? And what was Bezaban, or a cult master? Come to that, but They were evidently nearing Gup City because the waters around them and the skies above were filling up with mechanical birds every bit as fanciful as Butt the Hoopoe. Birds with snake heads and peacock tails, flying fishes, dog birds, and on the backs of the birds were water genies with whiskers of every possible hue, all wearing turbans and embroidered waistcoats and aubergine-shaped pajamas, and all looking so much like it was a good thing in Haroun's opinion that the colors of their whiskers were different enough to make it possible to tell them apart. Something more serious has occurred, If commented. All units have been ordered back to base. Now, if I had my disconnecting tool, he added sharply, I would have received the order myself, because, as of course, thieflets do not know, there is a highly advanced transceiver built into the handle. Luckily, however, Haroun came back just as sharply, since you half poisoned me with that dirty story, you worked things out, so there's no harm done except perhaps to me. If ignored this, and Haroun's attention was distracted as well because he noticed that a large patch of what looked like a particularly thick and tough type of weed or vegetable of some sort was actually racing along right beside them, keeping pace with Butt the Hoopoe without apparent effort while it waved vegetable tentacles in the air in a most disturbing fashion. At the center of the mobile vegetable patch was a single lilac flower with thick, fleshy leaves of a type that Haroun had never seen before. "What's that?" he inquired, pointing, even though he knew it was impolite to do so. "A floating gardener, naturally," said Butt the Hoopoe, without moving its beak. That made no sense. "You mean a floating garden," Haroun corrected the bird, which gave a little snort. "That's all you know," it harumphed. At the moment, the high-speed vegetation actually reared up out of the water and proceeded to wind and knot itself around and about until it had taken something like the shape of a man, with a lilac-colored flower positioned in its head, where a mouth should be, and a cluster of weeds forming a rustic-looking hat. So it is a floating gardener after all, Haroun realized. The floating gardener was now running lightly over the surface of the water, showing no sign of sinking. How could he sink? But the hoopoe interjected, would he not be a sinking gardener in that case? Whereas, as you observed, he floats, he runs, he walks, he hops, no problem. If called across to the gardener, who at once nodded a brief greeting. "Got a stranger with you, very odd, still your own business," he said. His voice was as soft as flower petals. After all, he was actually speaking through those lilac lips. But his manner was somewhat abrupt. "I thought all you guppies were chatterboxes," Haroun whispered to If, but this gardener doesn't say much. "He is talkative," If rejoined, "for a gardener anyhow." "How do you do?" Haroun called across to the gardener, thinking that, as he was the stranger, it was his business to introduce himself. "Who are you?" the gardener asked in his soft but abrupt way, without breaking his stride. Haroun told him his name, and the gardener gave another curt nod. "Molly," he said, "floating gardener, first class." "Please," Haroun said in his nicest voice, "what does a floating gardener do?" "Maintenance," answered Molly, on twisted story streams, also on looping same, weeding, in short, gardening. "Think of the ocean as a head of hair," said Butt the Hoopoe helpfully. "Imagine it's full of story streams, as thick as a mane, and full of soft, flowing strands. The longer and thicker a head of hair, the knottier and more tangled it gets. Floating gardeners, you can say, are like the hairdressers of the sea of stories, brush clean, wash condition. So now you know." "If," asked Molly, "what's this pollution? When did it start? How bad is it?" Molly answered the question in sequence. "Lethal. But nature, as yet unknown, started only recently, but spread is very rapid. How bad? Very bad. Certain types of story may take years to clean up. For example," Haroun piped up, "certain popular romances have become just long lists of shopping expeditions. Children's stories also. For instance, there was an outbreak of talking helicopter anecdotes. With that, Molly fell silent, and the rush to Gup City continued. A few minutes later, however, Haroun heard more new voices. They were like choruses, many voices at a time, speaking in perfect unison, and they were full of froth and bubbles. Finally, Haroun worked out that they were actually coming up from beneath the surface of the ocean. He looked down into the waters and saw two fearsome sea monsters right beside the racing hoopoe, swimming so close to the surface that they were almost surfing on the spray thrown up by Butt as it sped along. From their roughly triangular shape and their iridescent coloring, Haroun deduced that they were angelfish of some variety, though they were as big as giant sharks and had literally dozens of mouths all over their bodies. These mouths were constantly at work, sucking in soy streams and blowing them out again, pausing only to speak. When they did so, Haroun noted each mouth spoke with its own voice, but all the mouths on each individual fish spoke perfectly synchronized words. "Hurry, hurry, don't be late," bubbled the first fish. "Ocean's ailing, cure can't wait," the second went on. But Hoopoe was once again kind enough to enlighten Haroun. "These are Plentimoth fishes," it said. "They acquire their good name from the fact that you have no doubt registered, viz., that they have plenty of maws, i.e. mouths." So thought Haroun, filled with wonder, there really are Plentimoth fish in the sea, just as old Snooty Buto said, and I have traveled a long way, just as my father said, and I've learned that a Plutimoth fish can be an angelfish as well. Plentimoth fishes always go in twos, but added without moving its beak, they are faithful to partners for life. To express this perfect union, they speak only and always in rhyme. These particular Plentimoth fishes seemed unhealthy to Haroun. Their multiple mouths frequently sputtered and coughed, and their eyes looked inflamed and pink. "I'm no expert," Haroun called to them, "but are you both quite well?" The replies came swiftly, punctuated by bubbling coughs. "All this bad taste, too much dirt. Swimming in the ocean starts to hurt. Call me Baga. This is Goopy. Excuse our rudeness, we feel droopy. Eyes feel rheumy, throat feels sore. When we're better, we'll talk more." As you correctly guessed, all guppies love to talk, if said, an aside. Silence is often considered rude, hence the Plentimoth's apology. "They seem to be talking okay to me," Haroun replied. "Normally each mouth says something different if explained. That makes plenty more talk. For them, this is like silence." Whereas for a floating gardener, a few short sentences are called talkativeness. Haroun sighed. "I don't think I'll ever get the hang of this place. What do the fish do, anyway?" If replied that Plentimoth fishes were what he called hunger artists, because when they are hungry, they swallow stories with every mouth, and in their innards miracles occur. A little bit of one story joins to the idea from another, and hey presto, when they spew the stories out, they are not old tales but new ones. Nothing comes from nothing, thieflet. No story comes from nowhere. New stories are born from the old. It is the new combinations that make them new. So you see, our artistic Plentimoth fishes really create new stories in their digestive systems. So just think how sick they must be feeling. All these filthied up sagas passing through their insides, front to back, top to bottom, side to side. No wonder they look green about the gills. The Plentimoths surface to utter one more wheezy couplet. Things are worse than we've ever known. And the worst place is down in our old zone. On hearing this, the water genie clapped his hand to his forehead, almost dislodging his turban. What? Haroun insisted on knowing, and so, now even more preoccupied If, grudgingly explained that the old zone in the southern polar region of Kahani was an area to which hardly anybody went anymore. There was little demand for the ancient stories flowing there. You know how people are, new things, always new. The old tales nobody cares. So the old zone had fallen into disuse, but it was believed that all the streams of story had originated long ago in one of the currents flowing north along the ocean from the wellspring or source of stories that was located, according to legend, near the moon's south pole. And if the source itself is poisoned, what will happen to the ocean, to us all? If almost wailed. We have ignored it for too long, and now we pay the price. I made tea, and it's like spices. Hold on to this, but the Hoopoe interrupted. Hitting the brake now. Gup City dead ahead. Record time, va-va-va-voom, no problem. It's amazing what you can get accustomed to, and at what speed, Haroun reflected. This new world, these new friends. I've just arrived, and already none of it seems very strange at all. Gup City was all excitement and activity. The waterways crisscrossed the city in all directions. For the capital of the land, of Gup was built on an archipelago of 1,001 small islands just off the mainland, and at present these waterways thronged with craft of every shape and size, all packed with Guppy citizens who were similarly diverse and who all wore worried expressions on their faces. But the hoopoe, with Molly on one side and Goopy and Baga on the other, advanced more slowly now through this floating crowd, heading like everyone else for the lagoon. The lagoon, a beautiful expanse of multicolored waters, stood between the archipelago, where most guppies made their homes in intricately carved wooden buildings with roofs of corrugated silver and gold, and the mainland, where a gigantic formal garden came down in terraces right to the water's edge. In this pleasure garden were fountains and pleasure domes and ancient spreading trees, and around it were the three most important things in Gup, which looked like a trio of gigantic and elaborately iced cakes. Oh. The place of King Chattergee, with its grand balcony overlooking the garden to its right. The Parliament of Gup, known as the Chatterbox, because debates there could run on for weeks or months or even occasionally years on account of the Guppy fondness for conversation. And to its left, the towering edifice of P2C2E House, a huge building from which whirs and clanks were constantly heard, and inside which were concealed 1,001 machines too complicated to describe, which controlled the processes too complicated to explain. But the hoopoe brought If and Haroun to the steps at the water's edge. The boy and the water genie disembarked and joined the throng gathering in the pleasure garden, while those guppies who preferred the water, floating gardeners, plentimouth fishes, mechanical birds, remained in the lagoon. In the pleasure garden, Haroun noticed large numbers of guppies of an extraordinary thickness, dressed in entirely rectangular garments, covered in writing. Those, If told him, are the famous pages of Gup, that is to say, the army. Ordinarily, armies are made up of platoons and regiments and such like. Our pages are organized into chapters and volumes. Each volume is headed by a front or title page, and up there is the leader of the entire library, which is our name for the army, General Kitab himself. Up there was a balcony of the place of Gup, on which the city's dignitaries were now assembling. It was easy to identify General Kitab, a weather-beaten old gent with a rectangular uniform made of finely tooled, gold-inlaid leather, of the sort Haroun had sometimes seen on the covers of old and valuable books. Then there was the speaker, that is, the leader of the Chatterbox, a plump fellow, who was even now talking unstoppably to his colleagues on the balcony, and a frail, small, white-haired gentleman wearing a circlet of gold and a tragic look. This was presumably King Chattergee himself. The last two figures on the balcony were harder for Haroun to identify. There was a young and at present extremely worked-up fellow with a dashing but somehow foolish look to him, Prince Bolo, the fiancé of King Chattergee's only child, his daughter, the Princess Batshit. Oh my God, Princess Batshit. If whispered to Haroun. And lastly, a person with a hairless head of quite spectacular smoothness and shininess, bearing on his upper lip a disapprovingly insignificant mustache that looked like a piece of dead mouse. He reminds me of Snooty Buto, Haroun whispered to If. Never mind, nobody you know, but who is this fellow? In spite of whispering, he was overheard by many of the people now crowding together in the full pleasure garden. They turned in disbelief to inspect this stranger whose ignorance was so remarkable and whose nightshirt was equally unusual. And Haroun noticed that among the crowd were many men and women who, like the man on the balcony, had smooth, shiny, and hairless heads. These people all wore the white coats of laboratory technicians and were clearly the eggheads of P2C2E House, the geniuses who operated the machines too complicated to describe, or M2C2Ds, which made possible the processes too complicated to explain. Are you, he began, and they interrupted him for being eggheads. They were extremely quick on the uptake. We are the eggheads, they nodded, and then, with looks on their faces that said, we can't believe you don't know this, they pointed at the shiny fellow on the grand balcony and said, he is the walrus. He's the walrus? Haroun burst out astounded. But he's nothing like a walrus. Why do you call him that? It's on account of his thick, luxurious walrus mustache, one of the eggheads replied, and another added admiringly, look at it. Isn't it the best? So hairy, so silky smooth. But Haroun began and then stopped when If dug him hard in the ribs. I suppose, if you're as hairless as these eggheads, he told himself, even that pathetic dead mouse on the walrus's upper lip looks like the greatest thing you've ever seen. King Chatterjee raised his hand. The crowd fell silent, an unusual event in Gup City. The king attempted to speak, but words failed him, and shaking his head unhappily, he stepped back. It was Prince Bolo who burst into impetuous speech. They have seized her, he cried in his dashing, foolish voice. My Batshit, my princess! The servants of the cult master purloined her some hours back. Churls, dastards, varlets, hounds, by gum, they will pay for this. General Khatib took up the story. A blasted business, confound it. Her whereabouts are not known, but most probably she'll be kept prisoner in the citadel of Chup, the ice castle of Khatum Shud, in Chup City, at the heart of the perpetual night. Spots and fogs, a bad business, harumph. We have sent message to Cult Master Khatum Shud, continued the speaker of the chatterbox. These messages concern both the vile poison being injected into the ocean of the streams of story and the abduction of Princess Batshit. We demanded that he put a stop to the pollution and also return within 7 hours the kidnapped lady. Neither demand has been met. I have to inform you, therefore, that a state of war now exists between the lands of Gup and Chup. Oh, Mr. Rushdie. Extreme urgency is of the essence, the walrus told the crowd. The poisons that are spreading so rapidly will destroy the entire ocean if steps are not taken to get to the bottom of the problem. Save the ocean, cried the crowd. Save Batshit, cried Prince Bolo. This confused the crowd for a few moments. Then good-naturedly they altered their cry, for Batshit in the ocean! They exclaimed, and Prince Bolo looked satisfied enough with that. If the water genie put on his most winning expression, well, now it's war, young thieflet, he said with mocking regret. That means nobody at P2C2E House will have any time for your little request. You may as well hand back the disconnecting tool then. What do you say? I'll have you taken home for nothing, completely free. There. What could be fairer than that? Haroun clutched the disconnector with all his might and stuck out his lower lip mutinously. No, walrus. No disconnector, he said. And that's flat. If appeared to accept this philosophically. Have a chocolate, he said, and produced one from his many waistcoat pockets, a jumbo-sized version of Haroun's favorite chocolate bar. Realizing that he was starving hungry, Haroun gratefully accepted. I didn't know you made these here on Kahani, he said. We don't, If replied. Food production on Kahani is strictly basic. For tasty and wicked luxury items, we have to go to Earth. So this is where the unidentified flying objects come from, Haroun marveled. And that's what they've been after. Snacks. Oh my God, Mr. Rushdie. Mr. Rushdie. Just then, there was a small commotion on the palace balcony. Prince Bolo and General Khatib went inside for a moment, then returned to announce that Guppy's patrols, who had entered the outlying areas of the Twilight Strip looking for clues to the whereabouts of the Princess Batshit, had arrested a stranger, a highly suspicious person who could give no satisfactory account of himself or explain what he was doing in the Strip. I will question this spy before you all myself, shouted Bolo, and though General Khatib looked a little embarrassed by the idea, he did not argue. Now, a quartet of pages led a man onto the balcony, a man wearing a long blue nightshirt with his hands tied behind his back and a sack over his head. When the sack was removed, Haroun's mouth fell open, and the unidentified chocolate bar fell from his hand. The man standing and shivering on the palace balcony between Prince Bolo and General Khatib was Haroun's father, Rashid Khalifa, the storyteller, the unhappy Shah of Blah. Oh my God, Mr. Rushdie. If my nose wasn't itching so bad, I would still be laughing. Princess Batcheat. It's spelled Batcheat. Batcheat. Mr. Rushdie, you batcheat. Oh my gosh. So I had to concoct myself a new herbal tea, and I used black tea. I ground it. I'm going to make chai this week. And so there's dust in the air of stuff of black tea and ginger. I think that's what's making my nose itch. Either that, or I got a prepared sandwich from Prepared Foods when we went grocery shopping. And maybe there was something in that. Anyway, itchy between my boobies. Mr. Rushdie. Mr. Rushdie, Mr. Rushdie, Mr. Rushdie. Thank you for the good laugh, sir. Thank you for the good laugh, sir. Princess Batcheat. Oh my God. Oh my gosh.